Karate friends, welcome to Classics in Color, your weekly dive into some of the ancient world's wackiest facts. I'm Marc Graves, and I hope you're having a lovely Easter. I did not have a video idea specifically geared towards Easter, but I thought today would be a great opportunity to talk about some strange ways that pagan or classical motifs, thoughts, etc. influenced early Christianity. First off is just the languages themselves. So the New Testament was originally written in Greek, and then St. Jerome's Vulgate Latin Bible became one of the most, if not the most, common editions of the Bible read throughout the entire Middle Ages. And so both of these languages had a strong impact on how people spoke about, heard, understood Christian ideas that they were communicating. But Christianity doesn't stop with just using these languages. It also uses the ideas, the assumptions, the metaphors, the figures of speech, and the sayings, etc. of these two languages. For example, in Acts, actually, the Bible itself, 9 verses 5 through 6, Jesus appears to Paul and he actually quotes a line from the Greek tragedy, the Bacchae. Now, this was written around 400 BC, so it's already quite old at this time, and it's an interesting play for Jesus himself to be quoting to Paul if you know anything about what happens in the Bacchae. So the actual quote is, "It is not right for thee to kick against the pricks." So this is in reference to when you're prodding at a work animal on your farm, say to keep it plowing your field or whatever the case may be. It shouldn't kick back at you. It shouldn't try to kick back at that prod because it's just going to hurt itself more kicking against that pokey stick. So the first time we see this saying is, as I said, in this tragedy, the Bacchae, which the plot of that basically is that Dionysus is a new god on the scene, and he comes to the city of Thebes and meets with the king Pentheus. King Pentheus is very resistant to Dionysus. He does not want anything to do with this new god, and he tries to forbid all the people in the city from worshiping Dionysus. Dionysus obviously doesn't like this, so he drives all the women in the city mad so that they run out from the city, they abandon their children and all their responsibilities, and they're just running around in the wilderness, basically frolicking, dancing, and also occasionally tearing animals in pieces. That was also a thing that was associated with Dionysus, but generally they're having a good time, actually. And Pentheus is still resisting Dionysus, so Dionysus goes and meets him in disguise, and he slowly drives Pentheus mad as well. And it gets to the point where he has him wrapped around his finger, basically, and he has him seeing visions, seeing double. He can convince him to do whatever he wants. So he convinces Pentheus to go out into the wilderness to allegedly spy on the women there. But the women see Pentheus, they run up, and they tear him limb from limb. So it's a very brutal, gruesome scene. And the lesson of it is, don't resist Dionysus, don't resist gods, basically. And he gives this quote, "Don't kick against the pricks," to Pentheus as a warning before everything really falls apart, before Pentheus falls apart. And it's very interesting to see this quote being used in the New Testament. Paul, as a very educated Roman citizen, he would have been educated in these Greek and Roman classics. He would have known this play, known this quote. So perhaps we could say that this is Jesus giving him information, telling him, giving him this warning in a way that he will understand and will particularly resonate with him. So if you can't tell, I'm very tickled by the fact that the New Testament is quoting this random Greek tragedy. I really love that. But you don't just see Greek and Roman influence on sort of the highest levels of the well-educated and all that. You also see its influence in much humbler, everyday sorts of ways. So for example, in the art that we see on early Christian churches, tombs, catacombs, that sort of thing, a lot of it is heavily influenced by Greek and Roman myth. And I'm not an art expert by any means, but I have seen many very interesting examples of this that I'd love to share with you. So these are usually pretty humble examples. The church is very small. People are still just meeting in each other's living rooms. They don't have money for the huge cathedrals and the grand art that you see later. These are usually just small sketches or murals. And again, it's very interesting that they are so influenced by Greek and Roman myth. And I don't know if that is because Christians Christians are just so influenced by the art and the myth that they have around them that when they go to try to portray Jesus, that's just what they use. Or if they are hiring some local cheap artist to come in and the artist decides basically, I'm just going to do something I already know how to do from my myth, and then if they want to call it Jesus, that's fine, you know? So the first example of this is Jesus portrayed as a magus, or a magician of sorts. So he'll often have a funny little hat, and he'll have a stick or a rod or some sort of wand. And it's very strange, I will admit, to see Jesus portrayed as Harry Potter. But a magus was someone who was powerful, who had knowledge, who could influence and control nature. So I guess to some or many Christians, it seemed that was an appropriate way to portray Jesus. And similar to this, you sometimes see Jesus portrayed in similar iconography as Asclepius, who was the god of healing. So that one definitely makes sense, right? Jesus is certainly a god of healing, and Asclepius also is usually portrayed carrying a rod and often has a serpent with him as his sort of a pet or totem. So that one, at least to me, makes more sense. Next, you'll often see Jesus the philosopher. So it was a common way to portray philosophers in the ancient world to have the philosopher in the middle, often with an open book that maybe he's looking at, and then have him talking or teaching some students around him, right? That's the deal. If you're a philosopher, you better have some students who are interested in all the amazing things that you figured out and that you're going to tell them, right? You're not a philosopher if you don't have students. So you'll usually have either, 2 and 2 on each side to make it aesthetically nice, or sometimes 3 and 3. And so you'll see Jesus portrayed in the same way, not necessarily with the full 12 apostles, but just with the 2 and the 2, and he'll look very much like the portrayals of, say, Plato. And finally, sometimes you'll see Jesus portrayed as Orpheus. Orpheus, if you remember in Greek myth, was the greatest musician who ever lived. He was so great that when he played, all the animals would lie down and stop killing each other, and the wind would stop blowing, the trees would stop moving, even waterfalls would hold still, etc., right? It's a very beautiful myth, and so sometimes you'll see Jesus portrayed as Orpheus, specifically as a tamer of beasts. And I suppose this is a great metaphor for Jesus because he's supposed to tame the bestial element in humanity, right? So that is a good way, a way that makes sense to portray him. So those are some of the ways that the classics influenced really early Christianity. I'm not going to go any further because then you get into some really deep, although really fascinating stuff about theology and philosophy and all that, which I love, but that's too much for today. So I'm going to leave it there, and I hope you really enjoyed this video. Again, I hope you have a great Easter, and special thank you to subscribers and to Patreon members. It does mean a lot, and I hope to see all of you again next week. Karate.